Okay, everybody, welcome back to Talk with the Now podcast. You thought we were gone, but we're still here. Jason, you're still here. I'm still here. We're still here
We are, yes.
talking about whatever comes to our mind or whatever we feel like talking about.
That's right. Whichever way the wind blows, that's us.
I should probably shut up if I do anything. But how is Leaf? Your life? Your
Life is good, yeah. Life is good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good.
What is what's new?
Well,
Any rings in your future? Just kidding.
boxing rings, wrestling rings. No.
Yeah.
Not right now.
I understand. Well, I thought about a topic that we could talk about tonight, Jason. This isn't simply a topical show per se. That's Latin for those that don't know what per se is.
Per se, yes.
But I wanted to, I thought we would talk about something from the get-go here.
All right.
One of my, also, is there any, I don't think there's any big news in the news. Somebody passed away, did they not? A famous person? Well, Betty White did last week, but I was thinking there was somebody like this week that had passed away.
I'm sure there is.
I couldn't think of who.
Well, Ralph Emery from the old Nashville Now.
Now, we mentioned him on another show. I did not know this.
Yeah. Yeah, Ralph Emery.
Really?
Yep. Somewhere shotgun red, shed a tear. Yeah. I didn't know he was still alive, honestly. But yeah.
There was, for some reason, I thought I'd heard of a different person, like a famous celebrity that had passed away.
Ralph Emery.
But well, besides him and Betty White, I was thinking
Bob Saget. Yeah.
That's who it was. Bob Saget. Yeah. Yeah. That was crazy. And I don't know if they ever said if they know the cause of death or whatever, heart attack or whatnot. Yeah. I mean, just another example of you never know the day and time. That's for sure.
Very true. Very true.
And Bob Saget, boy, I tell you, that guy was a dichotomy of sorts.
He was.
If anybody's ever like, I wonder what the real Bob Saget was like. I would suggest watching his Joe Rogan interview that he did. He's pretty much known by now to have been a potty mouth, but you get a good glimpse into his life if you watch that Joe Rogan. He may have been on there a couple of times, I don't know, but interesting interview.
Yeah.
So anyways, back to the topic. I was going to say, one of my favorite topics is one of my favorite genres of music. Now, Jason, when you were, I don't know, 15, we'll say, what do you remember what year roughly you started liking music at all? Like, oh, I'm paying attention to this and I want the new cassette tape or the new album.
1980.
Back in the 80s.
84. Yeah.
So pretty young for you then.
Yeah, I mean, it's just normal. Yeah.
Well, what's the first but what was the first do you remember the first album, whatever you thought that you just loved and would like to have that you want to play in that cassette player?
Footloose soundtrack. So 83, 84. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to your teenage years from, we'll say 14, 15 up to about 20. What was your go-to kind of music or stuff that you listened to?
I mean, alternative rock. All kinds of stuff, honestly. Country, alternative rock, classics, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So 60s, 70s.
Well, the topic that I want to talk about was classic rock. And
right.
I started to call this classic rock of the 70s because to me that sort of is the
golden era.
Yeah, the golden era. But I didn't want to leave out like late 60s and some of the 80s that had good classic rock in it. So
I mean 80s is technically classic rock too now, so yeah.
But like for instance, a lot of Yes, for instance, they bled into the 80s.
That was
the Police were their second half of their career was best in the 80s. So to me, that's why I was kind of like, I don't really think I can leave this to 1970 to 79.
Right.
So that's why I'll probably label it as the classic rock special or something like that, as opposed to classic rock of the 70s, which, but anyways, the reason I asked you that is for me back, I would say from about the age of 13 to, oh gosh, early 20s, maybe. Maybe up until 25 or so. I mean, I really got in, like you said, the alternative rock scene of the 90s, but especially going back to 14, 15, 16, classic rock was my go-to, which was basically before. I mean, we're right as the alternative rock scene was coming about. I mentioned before that I used to ride around with one of my cousins. He had an El Camino that his dad gave him for his first car, and he had a Led Zeppelin Houses of the Holy seat or cassette tape. And we used to listen to that thing going up and down the road all the time, whether it be going to Turtles music, if anybody can remember that. And I remember one of my birthdays, he took me to Turtles. And this was like when we had discovered Led Zeppelin through his dad, I think, because he had his dad's old Houses of the Holy cassette tape or something like that. And so we would go, so we went to Turtles, and this was just when CDs were starting to become a little popular. And, his birthday present, hey, yeah, find a CD. I'll buy you a CD for your birthday. And I don't even know if I had a CD player yet, but the first CD that I got was Led Zeppelin 1. And that was sort of like, to me, kind of the beginning of like my venture into loving classic rock. And anybody that's in Atlanta or has been in Atlanta, if you're an old timer, would remember Z93 back in the day.
Yep.
And I don't even remember what it was before Z93. Do you?
Nope. I do not.
Z93 was the classic rock station in Atlanta. And
92.9. If
you live in Atlanta currently and you listen to The River, I mean, The River is a different kind of classic rock because it's it's 20 years plus later. But Z93 was kind of where I really discovered a lot of the classic rock of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I don't know how you came about loving classic rock. I know you told me your parents were really into Fleetwood Mac, right?
No.
Never mind.
The lady that lived with us off and on, Sherry, she was really into Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, she was, okay.
And Stevie Nicks. That's why I got sick of Stevie Nicks.
Stevie.
But yeah, it's the same thing, being around the radio, being around other people. Actually, the guy whose mom just died that I went to Savannah for the funeral, Bart, her son, got me into the Beach Boys originally, which kind of started me on that journey, that side of things. But yeah, I mean, you just, some songs, you just like a lot of classic rock to me. It's like you said, you can see where you were, like you can hear it in the song. Like I was in this car listening to it going down this road,
right?
I was in such and such as T-Bird with his T-tops off, and listening to Billy Squire and that kind of stuff. That just sounds like a really bad vinyl interior. Just what.
And I guess that the classic rock scene, we'll call it that. I would guess that it could be argued that the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and a number of other 60s groups and artists, they kind of gave birth to the classic rock era, which sort of, like you said, reached its golden age period kind of definitely after the Beatles.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Rolling Stones sort of rode the wave of it, but
they're still riding away where they were until Charlie Watts died. Yeah. Yeah.
But then you had, because to me, I was thinking about this today, and if you think about before, say, the Beatles, maybe before the Beatles, actually, Elvis could be argued, but you didn't really have like rock albums. I mean, you did have rock albums, but it was more kind of like, we call them one-hit wonders nowadays, but kind of, I think, before the 70s, you sort of had, everybody sort of had a hit. Like you would have a hit sprinkled here, sprinkled there,
Oh, they just popped up. Imagine that, like pop hits.
Yeah. Exactly. Going all the way back to like the rockabilly days, which I guess could as just as well be argued rockabilly, blues, country, they all sort of, meander their way into what would become classic rock. And
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's so many. It's like I have to get my phone out to get Spotify out just to, to make sure I'm fully aware. I mean, my memory is great, but I like to have it out.
Yeah, and but I don't know. I was just thinking about that, and but once you got to like the Beatles and the Stones, and especially Led Zeppelin, I think during the '70s that became a little bit more. I mean, you have to talk to somebody that's our parents' age, probably, but
well,
when people are like, "Oh, I want to go buy the new Yes album and listen to it from beginning to end."
Well, you can argue Pink Floyd too. Pink Floyd's that way.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Honestly, I think Zeppelin and Floyd were the ones that pioneered the album, band. Like, we're going to make this album and the album's going to almost tell a story. You could also argue that,
well, the Who were certainly into that.
Yeah. The Who. Yeah. Obviously the Who, and I think pioneered big rock, like stadium rock.
Mm-hmm.
And Zeppelin came along late 60s. And so did Floyd, for that matter. You listen to early Pink Floyd, and it's obviously 60s music. And then
they definitely came out of the acid rock,
and then switches to more ethereal type music in the 70s.
Right.
After what's his name died.
Well, we haven't done a Pink Floyd episode, but we will soon.
But I mean, it all kind of wraps up into the same. But you can also argue Black Sabbath. That's the band I was trying to think of. Black Sabbath, to me, had a little bit more of a heavier side.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And they kind of ushered in the more heavier rock.
Well, I don't think you'd have a Metallica if you didn't have a Black Sabbath. Right?
Oh God, no. You wouldn't have a lot of bands if you didn't have certain other bands.
Megadeth, all those other big whatever.
Yeah, or you wouldn't really have any of them if you didn't have Zeppelin. Honestly,
sure.
Zeppelin's the core running through all of this, and they weren't even around as long as a lot of bands,
Well, for their time, though, I guess they were in a way. I mean, a good solid 10 plus years, 11 years, I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, you look at other bands like the Rolling Stones.
Oh yeah.
50 plus, and Beach Boys 50 plus, honestly, well, we've said this before, there are some bands that should have stopped touring a while back because they don't sound that great, but like, take a band, I'm going to go a little bit out of the genre and say, take a band like U2, for instance. I don't know if you know U2, Gene.
Never heard of
them. I've struck a chord with Gene here. But they don't really, even though they had their prominence originally in the 80s,
right,
with Joshua Tree, stuff like that. It's like, you wouldn't call them an 80s band. I wouldn't.
No.
And they're just like kind of a band.
Only if they had broken up in like 1992 or something.
Right. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, so you've got some bands that just kind of persist is the word. But okay, so you take bands like, with the aforementioned Yes, and you look at Roundabout, say that song Roundabout. Obviously a 70s rock song. But then you've got Owner of a Lonely Heart. Definitely an 80s rock song. So they're still a classic rock band. And yes, a lot of things are technically anything over 20, 25 years is classic rock, but we know what genre we're talking about when we say classic rock. But it's like you said, you have bands like that kind of ushered in, like Black Sabbath, Zeppelin. I was trying to remember what somebody considered the first heavy metal song, and I think it was, I don't know. Somebody said Deep Purple or something.
I've heard that argued. I've also heard some argue that the Beatles' Helter Skelter might have been the first heavy metal song.
Yeah, that's the other one I've heard. Yeah, off the White Album. Yeah, and it makes sense because it's just this really kind of, it's not really heavy though when you look at it, but it's just kind of like chaotic.
And oddly enough, I think, and I could be wrong, and I have to go back and research it, but I think that was Paul McCartney sort of doing his I'm probably wrong about this, but I think that he may have did that after listening to the Who on one of their songs. I don't know if it was Miles and Miles or I Can See for Miles and Miles. It was I think it was one of their harder songs that Paul McCartney was like, I can do a hard song too. Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, I'll say this for especially McCartney, of all of them, very respectful of other musicians and very appreciative of other musicians and what they offered. To have called God Only Knows from the Beach Boys, from Brian Wilson's writing, one of the best songs ever written. Paul McCartney said that, Yeah. But yeah, back to 70s rock.
Well, just to mention your point about the Beach Boys, they weren't a very active band during the 70s, were they?
They were, but not in a 70s way. Like you had take the album Holland, for instance, which has one of my favorite Beach Boys songs, which is a remake, which is Sail on Sailor. You listen to that, it's definitely a 70s song. But yeah, you're right. They toured and did things, but it was mostly on their old stuff, which is fine. They had a resurgence in the 80s with, a few songs here and there. Kokomo being off of the Cocktail soundtrack being their biggest resurgence.
Yeah.
But
Kokomo,
a song that gets stuck in your head. It's like, and Brian Wilson wrote it, so it's gonna get
that was their number one best song. Head. That was their best song of all time, chart wise, right?
Oh, I don't know.
I could be wrong.
Which is hard to believe that one was, with Surfing USA and Surfing Safari and.
Well, I bet it for a lot of people, they were sort of like the Grateful Dead's Touch of Grey. Like nobody even knew about them or anything they did until they heard Touch of Grey.
Into the Dark album, yeah. Well, what's funny is you do know Grateful Dead, but you have them encapsulated in their 70s stuff of, Sugar Magnolia, the
Truckin'.
All the stuff off of, think of the American Beauty album for Grateful Dead. That's basically their big album. That one and Working Man's Dead are their two most famous albums. But then you've got that rogue song in the 80s, Touch of Grey, which is a great song. That song to me is one of their most enjoyable songs to listen to. I like the Grateful Dead. Don't get me wrong.
You've never seen them in concert though, have you?
No, I never did see them. No, well, you can't see them anymore, really.
You see the John Mayer rendition of Grateful
Dead. Which no thanks. Jerry's dead, so I didn't want. And back then I wouldn't have gone to see him in concert because it was the Dead, and that was where the weird people went and saw. But I wish I would have now, though. But yeah, we'll take the Grateful Dead, for instance. There you go. There's a band that had their peak in the 70s. But they're not necessarily, they're in their own little genre of jam bands.
I just thought about, though, adjusted for inflation, I'd be willing to bet they made more money during the 90s and early 2000s than they ever did in the 70s.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Because of all their concerts and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, they had that following, tour following. But if you had to, there are so many little bands from the 70s that, take Golden Earring.
Well, you know what? If I can stop you there, that brings me to a good point of a lot of the classic rock in my mind. Again, our reference in a lot of ways is Z93 in Atlanta. So a lot of people,
and then 96 Rock, because 96 Rock played classic too.
96 Rock. A lot of the classic rock. We talked about the album from beginning to end. A lot of that 70s stuff was really the first one-hit wonders that you had. That's why you make a good point with that, because you really, a lot of those are just one-off hits that people had in the classic rock scene, like that song. What were you saying? Which one were you about to say?
Which one?
You were mentioning one when I interrupt you.
Golden Earring.
Yeah, Golden Earring.
Well, they had Radar Love, and then they had Twilight Zone.
But they might have like 2 or 3,
Yeah.
Golden Earring, a great example of one. A couple of mine were Blinded by the Light or Manfred Mann's Earth Band,
Yeah.
which I think was a reiteration of Manfred Mann, if I'm not mistaken. There was a Manfred Mann in the 60s and early 70s. I don't know if they were the same thing.
And that was a Bruce Springsteen song that they did. So
right.
Which if you listen to it, anybody listen to it, you can kind of hear Bruce singing that. Like kind of like the Monkees were all written by Neil Diamond. Most of the songs are written by Neil Diamond. You can hear them. You can hear Neil Diamond in the song when you're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. There's a guy on YouTube who does, and I forget, he's like something like Todd in the Shadows, I think. And he does these like little, what do you want to call them, vignettes or topical things about music. And he did one on the song. He did like a 20-minute thing about Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. And I never thought about how funny the actual name Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo is. He's like, the song's called Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. It's a song about something you say to a little baby.
Right. I mean, yeah, look at songs like that. I mean, I was trying to think of other, because you had the different 70s music too. You had your poppy 70s, your Carpenters, your Carly Simon, that kind of stuff, and it's all kind of mixed in. Like some of them may have delved into rock a little bit. Carly Simon comes out of the whatchamacallit, Laurel Canyon scene, which a lot of these people did. I mean, because all right, we got to mention one of the biggest bands in the 70s to me, the Eagles. Sure. If it hadn't been for Linda Ronstadt, the Eagles wouldn't have formed. And
the Eagles are a good example of a band, because a lot of these bands were not full on rock and roll hoochie coo type classic rock that we think of. They weren't like Thin Lizzy all the time. They did other stuff. You don't like, you do like the Eagles would do hard stuff, but they would also do, a song that you would hear on soft rock station.
Yeah. And it's true. And the Eagles are timeless. I mean, yes, you got songs like Life in the Fast Lane, which are horribly 70s to me. And not definitely in a good way.
Oh, you don't like them?
I can't stand that
song. Oh, I like the Eagles later stuff.
I like the Eagles, but I don't like that song. It's just
I mean, it's not my favorite, but I like it pretty much.
But then you get into their lighter stuff like Best of My Love, stuff, Desperado, which is one of the better songs ever written.
Which that's not a song you would hear like on classic rock. You might.
But you would. I think you would.
Yeah. So classic rock doesn't necessarily mean hard driving guitar.
No. We everybody assumes obviously one of the bigger bands in the 70s, Skynyrd. When you think of Skynyrd for the but and a very well versed, talented band. Obviously, had a big tragedy, and that really ended anything really worthwhile from that band. The crash in Mississippi, but they bands like that, then you get some. What's the other one I was trying to think?
One of my favorites when I was younger. I had their greatest hits, and I listened to it. I wore that CD out.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody anybody didn't have that.
I got a good story about that. I got a good story. Back in the cassette days, when you would record, a lot of times if you wanted to have a song on a tape, because you couldn't afford to go out and buy the cassette player, you would listen to it like on 96 Rock, and you would record it on your recorder so that you could get that song recorded so you could hear it anytime.
Yep.
So my cousin Lamar and I used to do that. And
Lamar,
there was one
vote for him, by the way. Anyway,
yes,
go ahead.
There was a Sweet Home Alabama. At the beginning of the song, they go 1, 2, 3. Doom, 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 doom. Okay. There was a time that I recorded it, and Lamar, he started to play it one time, and instead of pressing, you have to know what these recorders are like. If you weren't careful, you would press the record and play button at the same time, and that would sort of like record over whatever you recorded. So when they did the 1, 2, 3, it would go. So for like the longest time, Lamar ticked me off because he accidentally recorded over like a 2-second interval of Sweet Home Alabama. I was always like, funny. Lamar, I can't believe you did that. Anyways, you had to be there 30 years ago.
Yeah, man. I was trying to think of some other bands from back then.
Well, you have so many. I mean,
you get into that kind of same
Long Cool One with the black dress. Sorry.
Yeah, which was a band that started. I mean, the Guess. Yeah, no, not the Guess Who. The Hollies.
Yes, the Hollies.
Had other songs like "The Air I Breathe" and that kind of stuff. But the Hollies was a great band. In fact,
interesting sound.
Oh yeah, just really great voice. That voice is just I'd argue, and it's just one of those great voices of rock.
Yeah,
but I actually bought that vinyl not that long ago. Found a good copy of it on vinyl.
Really?
But
Tommy James and the Shondells sort of was in that.
Yeah, I still think of them as 60s. But it did have some stuff in there. But then you get bands like Marshall Tucker Band.
Right. The Southern rock bled easily into that. Because like on a lot of classic rock stations, you'll hear that Southern rock. You might hear Little Feat, Atlanta Rhythm Section.
Oh, Little Feat, dude, great band too.
Man. Marshall Tucker, you'll hear those, but at the same time, you'll hear some Detroit stuff come down from Ted Nugent and others from that whole.
Whatchamacallit, Bob Seger.
Yeah,
there we go. I mean, stuff like that. Uncle Ted's great. Ted Nugent. I mean, you can't argue with that. That man's awesome.
Still not in the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't care. He actually probably prefers that he's not. But I heard him on another guy, David Nino Rodriguez, who is a heavyweight champion boxer, has a Patriot podcast, and Uncle Ted was on there one time, and it was amazing. It was Ted's like Uncle Ted went to church. I mean, he just took us to church. It's like past the plate. But anyway,
even if you don't like Uncle Ted, he is a hoot to listen to.
Is and one of the most intelligent people you're gonna ever meet. I had edited on a hunting show one time, and he was on there.
I feel like if I hung out with Ted Nugent, I would just shut up and probably listen to him for 3 hours, not really.
You could, yeah. I mean, and that's what we did. I mean, I remember listening to him when we were in. I mean, I got to meet him. We were in the room, and it was like, man, this guy is just amazing. Like I could just sit there and like take notes and listen to him all day. He's like a really cool college professor.
He might be the greatest example of how, because let's just do the elephant in the room of classic rock, that it's known for being sex, drugs, rock and roll. And Ted Nugent has always been the biggest advocate of, I was not into the
scene,
the drugs or the party lifestyle of it.
So he was not. He's always been sober his entire life from drugs and alcohol. I mean, you look at the guy, you think he could knock back a 6-pack, but he doesn't.
Right.
He just doesn't do it. And he has a very strict diet that, and he eats a lot of venison that he shoots, and he's just whatever, he's happy, but anyway, I'm trying to think of some other big bands that,
well, you have so many. I can just tell you, pulling up my own playlist right now.
I mean, Deep Purple's another big one. Obviously, we mentioned it a little bit before, but they've got a lot of, their version of Hush to me is the best.
I don't know, Jason. Just the fact that David Coverdale would be going to White Snake, and nowadays I feel like I can't listen to somebody's classic rock list without hearing White Snake. Just kind of.
Is this love? No, it's probably indigestion. But
the Still of the Night. You also forgot AC/DC, my friend.
I was getting there. Don't worry. It's the number one band from Australia, AC/DC. Obviously, AC/DC's in a class all their own. I mean, it's just
So here would be
talk about a derivative band,
right?
That you could still listen to and not get annoyed by. Not like your more recent new rock Canadian bands, which I won't mention, which I think are obvious to most people listening, that are the butt of every joke.
In a lot of ways, AC/DC is sort of the antithesis of the Eagles. Like Eagles were very versatile, had a lot of different types of song. AC/DC were a one-trick pony, but it was a really good trick, right?
And they're not from Detroit, but they sang a song about Detroit, Kiss. I mean,
are they your favorite classic rock band? I don't know.
No.
Okay. But I know you were like a big fan.
But I'm a fan, yeah. And a lot of people didn't realize you know, how many songs they had and how much influence they had. There were another one that had a good following, like a Grateful Dead type following to them with the Kiss Army.
Okay, let me ask you this as a Kiss expert, in my opinion, somewhat. Did Kiss, who's responsible for hairband music? Is it Kiss? In a lot of ways, because they kind of brought the hair in, the makeup in, and all that.
No, they didn't bring. No. They didn't bring that in.
I know glam rock did. What now?
One man did that.
Bowie.
David Bowie.
Yeah, that's
another classic rock great.
But I was just thinking about Kiss being, you know, because to me, when
I think shock rock, they were doing more shock rock. Like we're here to. We have a stage show, which to me is still the best stage show in rock and roll ever.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like some hair bands and stuff, but it's not classic rock. But to me, well,
it technically is by age, but not by genre. I'm with you. It's 80s metal. It's 80s hairband music. It's its own genre.
Exactly. We could do a show on that. But to me, it's a little. Just opinion. It's less than classic rock. I like classic rock better than that, is what I'm saying. You know,
I can see that. Yeah. I know what you mean.
I guess what I was just asking is Kiss and David Bowie, did they lead up to those kind of bands?
I think so, because I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And I think Kiss showed people that you can do more than just the music. Well, they did that to get people to come out and listen to the music, is what they did, you know. Right. And they had this insane show. I mean, those guys are from New York, and they just said, "Hey, we're gonna do something different and be kind of crazy on stage and be a little more theatrical," and they did that. Mm-hmm. Now the funniest thing is, they had Rush open for Kiss on a tour back in their early days.
Another great one we haven't mentioned yet.
Trust me, I was getting to it. That's my favorite classic rock band of all time.
That's true.
Even though it's more progressive rock, you know,
which is sort of a subgenre, kind of like classic rock. I mean, Southern rock is sort of a subgenre,
right? I mean, obviously, my favorite classic rock band is Led Zeppelin. I mean, that's just
right.
So aside from macro, when we go to micro, it's Rush. And the guys from Kiss, I mean, Gene Simmons talks about this all the time. Another smart person, by the way. Gene Simmons is one of the smartest people around. And he sits there and he talks about Rush. And he said, these guys were blowing us away on stage. He said, these three guys were just amazing. He said, we would sit there in the backstage and just watch them and go, wow. They haven't stopped playing that song for 20 minutes.
How do they do that?
And he said, but they didn't party. They went back to their hotel rooms and read books, and you know, and he said that's just how they were. He said we didn't have to worry about them stealing our groupies, is what and it's just
I just had this image in my head of Neil Peart going back to his room and reading War and Peace or something like that after doing a
that's set. An accurate image, Gene. I mean, that's he talks about it. I mean, that's why he talks about in the song Limelight. I can't pretend a stranger is a long awaited friend. That's Neil Peart's, introvertness coming out in a song.
Right.
Okay. Peart, sorry, but yeah.
So if we want to bring it home a little bit, is it safe to say that the Allman Brothers are the best classic rock band to ever come out of Georgia?
I would have to say, as far as the success goes, yeah. The actual Allman Brothers and Dickie Betts and them. I mean, it's hard not to at least like one Allman Brothers song,
Right.
I mean, they're one of the original jam bands that'll just sit there and play, or would sit there and play before they died. But yeah.
Right.
Out of Macon. And, I mean, as long as we're just, are they the greatest band to come out of Georgia? No, but
yeah, that's why I said classic rock band.
Yeah, I definitely think they are the best. Yeah, I would say so. I would say they're definitely the most successful too.
Who do you think is the best band to come out of Georgia? Popularity, probably REM, right?
Yeah. I've always liked the Black Crowes, which could also be Southern rock. It is Southern rock, but could also be classic rock. They could have easily made those songs in the 70s and been just as successful as they did.
Yeah, they were sort of 10 years past due on their
But they were
music.
But they were great. It was almost like a breath of fresh air, I think, and that's why they took off so well.
Okay, this is not classic rock we're speaking of here, but to me, they were almost had, let's just say, had Nirvana and the alt rock scene had not happened during the 90s, the Pearl Jams or whatever. I kind
Yeah.
of felt like there was a newish genre developing with Guns
Yeah.
N' Roses and the Black
Yeah.
Crows that was kind of
Yeah.
in that sort of classic. It's like we're done
Right.
with the hair metal stuff. We just want to play
It was
rock
that in
music
between
again.
time. You're right. Yeah, I mean, even though people try to lump Guns N' Roses in the hair band, they're not really.
STP
Yeah.
could probably be argued in that category as well.
Yeah, I mean that's a good place. But I mean, STP and Guns N' Roses are both the LA,
Right.
rock scene.
But they were doing the same sort of music to me as, I mean, obviously Black Crows were doing something a little different.
Yeah,
but
Black Crows are definitely Southern. I mean, you can definitely tell the Southern in them.
Yeah, I mean, the Black Crows were not trying to be Faster Pussycat.
No, but there's a lot more soul involved in Black Crows.
I mean,
but
oh yeah, go ahead.
no, I just say, you can, but they could have made the album Shake Your Moneymaker in 1978, and it would have been as big a hit.
Yeah,
as it was when they made it. So it's like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like there's some bands that just kind of echo that,
And there's another guy too, to me, like a lot of the, not a lot, but a few of the classic rock bands, they kept going on.
Yeah.
And they started out in the late 70s. And to me, the perfect example of that is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Oh, definitely.
Started out in the late 70s, 78-ish. But I mean, he just went on into the 90s with his music.
Right. And had consistent hits, very much like a U2 kind of thing.
Right.
Where
but he was in the classic rock mold, though.
Oh, definitely. Well, definitely Southern rock to me.
Right.
People forget that Gainesville is the South, Gainesville, Florida, but it is.
For sure.
And he had that kind of the raspy sound. And I'm not the biggest Tom Petty fan, but I respect what they did.
Yeah. But if you think about his music, though, like let's go back to if you rewind to the late 80s, there was not a whole lot of classic rock sound out there to be found.
No.
But Tom Petty,
was big then.
Who?
Progressive rock was really big
progressive rock was still pretty big, but Tom Petty was one of the few people, like if you saw a new MTV video or if he put out a new album, Full Moon Fever being a great example. You're like, oh great, I can buy this album and I'm going to hear a good classic rock,
Yeah, well, you're going to hear his sound, which he didn't change his sound. He would change his music around a little bit, but the sound was still him. Kind of like, all right, we'll take your corporate rock, like your Boston, which Boston's technically 70s.
Yeah, and I love their good classic rock band.
Boston's a 70s classic rock band too, which I always had, but they had that sound. The minute that guitar started, you knew it was Boston. Mm-hmm. Kind of like the minute you heard, Angus start up, it was AC/DC. It's the same kind of sound, same kind of signature that they had. But yeah, definitely Boston is up there, even though they're considered corporate rock, but they're still classic.
Oh, that first album's amazing though.
That first album is, I mean, as far as self-titled first albums go, it's got to be one of the most successful. Everybody thinks it's their greatest hits, but it's not. It's their first album, and I mean, to have that many hits off of it, was really cool. And all right, then we're forgetting another band from Boston, a big one.
Well, I was about to say Aerosmith.
Yeah,
but my question was going to be: are there any others out of that area besides Boston and Aerosmith?
I know people are yelling at us right now if they're listening, but I can't think of anything, but I know there are. Because see, I don't consider Neil Diamond classic rock.
No, not really.
But
Aerosmith, though, I mean, Dream On is easily a classic rock hit.
Aerosmith and Boston are the two most successful bands from that area.
Now here's a guy that I just saw on my playlist. Elton John. Talk about a guy that goes across different genres. My gosh.
Yeah, you got to put him in there.
I mean, from Lion King to stuff.
from your Crocodile Rock to Tiny Dancer. I mean, great songs. Him and Bernie Taupin just.
Well, Bernie was kind of the brains, right, of writing.
Yeah, Bernie. I mean, it was like he was the. Almost said the straight-laced one, but you know what I mean. he was the straight when Elton was the laced one. But in more ways than one. I mean, it's true that kind of makes the good partnership. And
Right.
For the longest time, everybody assumed that, they were an item, but they weren't.
Right.
Bernie was married and had to, whatever, but they were just lifelong friends. And I mean, they're the ones, they worked together on that Lion King soundtrack. I mean, they did everything. And it's just to have these songs that are ingrained in our culture now, I mean, they really are. Think about,
go ahead.
Think about Your Song, that song, Your Song. I mean,
not my song, but his song, Your Song.
His song, Your Song. This is your song. Maybe quite simple, but whatever. I mean, it's just like, wow. It just
Rocket Man always gets me. That's my favorite of his.
Yeah, Rocket Man, great song. Great song. I mean,
I was looking at. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, like, I'm not a huge Elton John fan, but I'm a fan of a few of the songs. Like, that's kind of how I am with a lot of those bands from the 70s, like we're talking about.
There was a guy, another band that I was looking at on my playlist. We're talking about Tom Petty and how, pickings were slim when it came to classic rock during the 80s. Yeah. A lot of times, because you had so many different forces. You had the new wave force going against things. You had kind of the post-punk, which U2 came out of that. You had hair bands were kind of like taking over the rock scene for a long time.
Right.
People like Poison. But if you wanted to find good old-fashioned classic rock music, you had to look no further than Dire Straits.
Oh, dang. How did I not remember that one? Yeah.
And I would have forgotten it had I not saw it on my playlist here. And man, Dire Straits, I didn't listen to them that much. If you go and listen to more of their catalog, it's very impressive.
And, and if most people didn't know, Mark Knopfler, obviously to me, one of the greater guitarists of all time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Was trained by country chicken picking Chet Atkins.
Mm-hmm.
And was actually a pallbearer at Chet Atkins' funeral.
There's an excellent PBS special, by the way, with him playing with Chet and some other artists. If you haven't seen that,
I mean, yeah, it doesn't get much better than that guitar-wise to me.
Yeah, their first album is amazing. By the way, it's pre Money for Nothing days.
Right. I mean, because for that matter, you can take the other protege of Chet Atkins, Vince Gill, and his band Pure Prairie League from back then, and put them in there. Let Me Love You Tonight, Amy. Falling in and out of love with you. I mean,
yeah. We didn't mention another LA scene band. I know there are classic rock bands from LA, but I guess the Doors have to be the biggest one, right?
Freaking, they're to me, I'm gonna say, and you might argue with me on this. I will say the Doors is the greatest rock band from the US.
Really?
Yeah.
I was gonna say the Eagles.
No, I would say the Doors because of the time when they got there, like rock band now, not like pop rock and roll, but like more rock type band is the Doors.
For their time period, it's a good argument.
I mean, I kind of stole that from a list. One of the top whatever US rock bands of all time, and they were top on the rock band completely for a lot of lists too.
Mm-hmm.
Not to diss some of the better rock and roll bands, groups, like the Beach Boys to me are the top US rock and roll group. But as far as like heavier, like more rock music, heavy-ish rock music, the Doors, period. And that's a Sunset Strip, LA. I mean, the Doors were the house band at the Whiskey, a go-go. Mm-hmm. I mean, come on. Can you imagine how many people? Can you imagine being at the Whiskey a Go-Go in the late 60s to mid 70s just to listen, like to just hang out there and listen to these bands come through?
They have a couple of really good live albums.
Yeah. I mean, LA Woman was art.
Were the Eagles out of LA as well? I don't remember.
Yeah. They were from the Laurel Canyon scene.
I know they were a little after the Doors, I guess.
Well, they were the second wave of Laurel Canyon. That's the point. The Doors were Laurel Canyon too.
Okay, so enlighten us now then for our listeners at home about the whole Laurel Canyon scene.
Give us sort of Cliff Notes. All right, a Cliff Notes thing is Laurel Canyon was an area out in the foothills, one of the canyons in LA. There's a lot of those out there, and from the kind of mid-ish 60s through the 70s. it was the place to be. And through the hippie culture, there was the whole idea of, we don't lock our doors, come in, bring your guitar, we're going to sit around and play. And a lot of the music that we know as like staples of our culture came out of that scene. And so you had, David Crosby sitting there playing with, gosh, I mean, all kinds of people, you had, I mean, later on, James Taylor came out of that, Carly Simon, Jackson Brown,
Janis Joplin out of that.
Janis Joplin, Linda Ronstadt. And earlier you had, Cass Elliot had a house there, and a lot of people hung out at Mama Cass's house. Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees had a house there. There are a few things that kind of stopped that. Obviously, the biggest one was the Manson murders, because it happened, a quarter of a mile away. That stopped the whole open door policy, and people started buying guns, and there was none of that. That ended the hippie culture, but it also kind of changed the music out of Laurel Canyon. And then came in the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and Carly Simon and those early 70s stuff that we think of, and big time songwriters, Graham Nash, all those big time people out of that scene. So a lot of people, the Doors were in that, obviously in the 60s as well. Right. And so there's a couple good documentaries. There's Echoes from the Canyon, and that's Jacob Dylan, because Bob Dylan was in there too. There's Jacob Dylan hosted that, and he's got a lot of new people, and they're talking about the music, and Beck's on there and all that. Really good. But that's more of a, we're going to perform these songs in honor of thing. But if you look at just the Laurel Canyon series on Epix, it's like a 4-part series or something, and it's just phenomenal. You've got all the people that came out of that scene, but that shaped classic rock for us, and it also kept classic rock going when it could have easily died with the 60s. That August night in 1969 when those murders happened. So, well, what's funny is, Woodstock happened after that. So Woodstock was kind of like the antithesis of your 60s classic rock. Like that was it. Jimi Hendrix, which I can't believe we didn't mention Jimi Hendrix.
I was about to, yeah.
But people that obviously
was it not the Altamont scene? They consider sort of the crash of the whole peace love movement.
You mean the other festival that happened?
Yeah, was that called Altamont?
Well, they tried
Rolling
to be
Stones.
It tried to be a Woodstock, and it wasn't. It was because they hired the Hells Angels for security.
And I heard that sort of like ended the love, free, peace movement type thing.
Well, that, and then once, I would say the murders on Cielo Drive happened, that started the death of it. That closed the doors in the canyon. That did that. And then when they found out later in December, that's how long it took them to find out who did it, because one of them bragged in jail, and they figured out who killed everybody. And when they found out that it was a pseudo hippie cult thing, right, that ended the hippie side of it, the peace loving, the 60s. Once that was found out that that's who that was. And so nobody was going to pick up hippie hitchhikers anymore, because they thought they're going to get their throat slit. So, that kind of ended that part. But then you had the 70s scene come in, which was still out of Laurel Canyon. So it still had that songwriter atmosphere. So it was a very bohemian, that's the word I was looking for, very bohemian culture. So there was a lot of, houses on the cliff, all up it was like a little oasis, in LA, whereas LA is the grind and this,
right,
crazy fast paced town. You go to the canyons, and they're all like, have their own little like colonies basically. And that's what that was.
Okay.
So it's interesting. And that kind of shaped classic rock to me.
Yeah.
You didn't have, Zeppelin didn't hang out there, but the Beatles did when they were in LA. They did a lot of Laurel Canyon. Somewhere Mickey Dolenz has tapes that he recorded in his house of Paul McCartney and him and David Crosby and a couple other people, like all just jamming out in a room.
Oh.
And I'm like, just that's part of your personal tape recorded collection. I mean, just, it blows your mind to think that all those people came through that scene.
Right.
And had it not been for that open door policy originally, we might not have had some of the songs we had. And
right.
And then you get the heavier stuff coming in, and I don't know. I think Zeppelin and Pink Floyd to me are the album bands, the original, like put this album on, listen. I mean, people did that anyway, but the ones that made the albums for that. I mean, Zeppelin's would tell stories, you know. I mean, that's very storytelling songs.
Yeah.
And I mean,
well, I kind of, a lot of ways I look at it is that and I mean, this could be a 3-hour special, but we'll round it out soon. You had bands like The Who and the Beatles, who had sort of a friendly rivalry, I think. Bands like that, and a few dotted here in the U.S., like the Beach Boys and stuff. And they sort
Paul
of
Revere and the Raiders.
Yeah, and they sort of were the catalyst to getting once they sort of semi-retired or whatever, they were sort of the catalyst to the Led Zeppelins, the Pink Floyds, Eric Clapton, who we haven't really mentioned yet.
Yeah,
you know, because Eric Clapton, like you said it. I mean, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Eric Clapton. It doesn't get much more basic classic rock than those three.
I agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. And you know, Clapton, he's just got a great story altogether. You know, overcoming addiction and adversity, and giving back to that. You know, through his clinic and all that. Okay, Clapton, definitely. Clapton, just, I mean, another blue, but it's all blues. It's very blues based. Everything we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. You know. Clapton. So I've got a few to round it out. I started to look up a website of classic rock stuff, but I was like, screw that. I probably know more about classic rock than some of these people that do these lists. And so I just put up one of my own playlists here, and I'm just going to name off some of the bands and people that we've already mentioned, some of them. Just like for somebody that's listening to this and they're like, you know, I kind of want to look more into classic rock. What is it? And here are some of the bands that I have. And we've already mentioned the first band that I have on my whole list is Hold Your Head Up by Argent.
Oh, yeah.
And not many people think about that, but that's a classic rock song.
Oh, yeah.
And and I'm just going to name off a bunch of them, and you stop me when you want to say something. But
okay,
Bad Company.
Oh, good grief! How did we not mention Bad Company? Yeah,
right. Bad Company, whose great song was Bad Company. Back when people would, hey, we're going to name a song after ourselves.
Silver of Gold. I love that song.
Yeah, they had a song about Atlanta as well.
Yep.
We mentioned the Hollies, the Beatles, David Bowie. Also, another thing about Clapton, a lot of people don't realize is that he was very he bounced around. He never had a band per se, except when he started with Cream, which he was with a band before Cream, but that never mind. But he was also with a band called Derek and the Dominoes, Bell Bottom Blues, and
Layla.
Of course, Layla is probably his best classic rock song, if you will.
And that's from Derek and the Dominoes, yeah.
And you mentioned Billy Squier. Blind Faith was another one of
Blind Faith
that was out there. Okay, here if we want to reach a little bit deeper, we go Donovan.
You know, the other one I didn't even think about is Guess Who.
Oh yes, the Guess Who.
The Guess Who, great band.
One of the few Canadian classic rock bands besides Rush.
Yeah, there's probably more than you think, but yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, this band, I've heard people complain about this too, but it's probably one of the strangest, you know, it's like having a yin and a yang in a band. Chicago.
Yeah.
It's like you have the classic rock Chicago, and then you have the 80s
Peter Cetera.
Corporate whatever rock band.
Yeah, exactly. Totally different sound. Yeah.
Now here's a band that was mainly in the 80s. Another one kind of like Tom Petty in a lot of ways. They weren't classic rock in the traditional sense, but the Cars were kind of that way.
Oh, yes.
I always loved the Cars.
One of the greatest bands to me. I just, you know, I got a more of an appreciation later in life for them. Man, Dangerous Type. That is my favorite Cars song.
Oh,
I don't know. But they don't really have a bad song. It's like, you know,
you being a guy that's into records, you should check out some of their live stuff sometime too. It's really good from the 80s.
I do have a lot of their vinyl, like their regular studio vinyl, though. I have most of their albums actually.
Their live stuff is excellent. We mentioned the Doors, Bob Seger. Bruce Springsteen is sort of like, he kind of hit it as well during the 70s. Born to Run is sort of like, unfortunately, Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on who you are and your taste in verse. You know, I like Born to Run, but let's see.
The Jersey Dylan, I call him the Jersey Dylan. There we go.
Now, another guy that was sort of very versatile was, of course, Billy Joel, who has classic rock songs. You know,
one of our greatest songwriters of all time, honestly. Definitely. I've seen him 5 times in concert. So,
I mean, there's just too many pages out of this book, Jason, to do in 1 hour, I think. But
I agree.
You had Meatloaf, Grand Funk Railroad.
Yes.
Bo Skaggs, of course. I mean,
Boz Skaggs. Yeah.
Excuse me, Boz Skaggs. I don't know why I said Bose. Foreigner.
Oh, Foreigner. Lord. Yes.
Lordy. Foreigner.
One of those great. I just get there's so many of them. It's hard to remember them all.
Yeah. That's why I say it's almost like. And don't forget the Black Oak, Arkansas. You know,
Black Oak, Arkansas. Yep. Yep.
And let's see. Rick Derringer.
Who did the song Green Grass and High Tides? Who was that?
Oh, Jason. That would be Tampa's own. Tampa, Florida's very own crap. I forgot.
Very own crap. Yes.
I've actually got that somewhere on this list.
Grass and High Tides forever.
Steely Dan. We didn't mention them.
Oh yeah, Steely Dan took jazz and made it rocky. Yes. One of the most talented bands of all time, Steely Dan, I would say.
And I can't believe I'm glad I'm looking at my playlist here because Peter Frampton. I mean, that should be on every classic rock playlist that you have.
Yeah, one of the few people that got more famous for a live album than anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Fleetwood Mac, of course, has a lot of good classic rock stuff.
Yep.
The Police you could put in there. Police were
young. Yeah.
They are.
They are. I mean, they're classic. They definitely bled more into the 80s, but they're definitely
And you touched on Neil Young with Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Yeah. Neil Young was a pioneer for a lot of things. I think Neil Young was more of a pioneer for the alternative scene. If you want to know my truth, he's kind of like the roots of it.
Sure, absolutely.
You think about, I mean, if you listen to Eddie Vedder, I mean, he's very much Neil Young inspired. A lot more palatable vocally than Neil Young was.
I think that and the sort of the what do you call it? What do you call that genre with like REM and I guess it's new wave.
It's new wave alternative. Yeah.
Okay. And we mentioned Styx and
Styx. Yeah.
Of course, the
Styx
band
in Kansas. Hello.
Yeah, Kansas. Yeah. The band was a short period of time, and they were great as well.
Yeah.
Steve Miller Band needs to be in your classic rock list if you don't have him in there.
Otherwise, I mean, it's going to get in your head anyway. You might as well.
And we mentioned Peter Gabriel and Genesis. Yeah, you got to look into them.
Yeah.
We mentioned the Rolling Stones and the Hollies, and Bachman Turner Overdrive.
That's right. You ain't seen nothing yet, Gene.
I think that if you're going to get into your 70s rock, Joe Cocker and Joe Walsh should be in there.
Oh, Joe Walsh, his solo stuff, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Who later on, the Amboy Dukes, that was a Mr. Nugent's band. Another great one that I forgot to mention with Tom Petty in the 80s, Journey.
Yeah.
Kind of classic rock you could hear during the 80s.
Yep, Journey definitely. Journey is another timeless band.
And I didn't mention Squeeze either.
Squeeze, yes. Tempted by the fruit of a dove.
And you know, a band that I loved as a kid was actually the Moody Blues.
Yes, they definitely spanned 60s and 70s, definitely, and 80s for that matter.
And let's see, what else do I have listed here? We got Fog. Oh, go ahead.
Supertramp.
Fog Hat. 10 years after. 10 years after. Head East.
East.
Never been a reason.
Head East. There's a band.
Okay.
Their singer, John Schlitt, later joined what classic Christian rock band? Petra. He was the lead singer for Petra.
No way.
Until they stopped touring. Yep.
The guy from Head East.
Yep. And when you hear Petra, you can actually hear that the save my life, I'm going down for the last. I mean, you could just hear that's his sound. I was talking to oh gosh, what's his name? The lead singer from Stryper. He came to play at 37 Main in Buford here, and I was talking to him. I got a little thing signed from him, and I was telling him, about stuff. And he's like, man, what was that? He said, I sang with John Schlitt at Petra one time. And he's like, his old band Hetty. So I was like, wait, what? He goes, yeah, Hetty's. You didn't know his lead. He's like, what was their song? I was like, Never Been Any Reason, right? And he starts singing it, and I sing it with him. It was just kind of funny moment.
But Never Been Any Reason, and like, Blinded by the Light are like two of your songs that you'll always see. And then you might follow it up with like a something like
another Atlanta band, Starbuck, Moonlight, Feels Right,
or maybe Don't Fear the Reaper by what's her.
Oh gosh, yeah, Blue Oyster Cult.
Oyster Cult. But I saw at the end of my playlist here, which is still growing. I have 271 songs on it.
Oh, amateur.
I know it's more like laziness.
I've got one that's got 700 and something songs on it.
Oh, geez. Yeah. To show how classic rock could sort of, I think it has such good appeal because there's so much in it. Mm-hmm. You could have a band like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, British band, right?
Yeah, really good band. Yeah.
And underneath that, I have Charlie Daniels, who is basically country, but he delved into the classic rock genre with Devil Went Down to Georgia.
CDB, man. And in America,
mm-hmm.
All this South's gonna do it again.
And I mean, Charlie Daniels might be the most country of the classic rock bands.
Yeah, I mean, between him and Pure Prairie League, Marshall Tucker Band,
right?
Marshall Tucker and Charlie Daniels could tour together. They probably did tour together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you had a good mix in the 70s. Of course, then in the late 70s, you had other music that we don't talk about. They kind of bled into it. And then you had some classic rock bands doing disco songs like Kiss's I Was Made for Loving You. Definitely a disco song. But
maybe on the,
for that matter, you can put the Bee Gees in classic rock because they started in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that Bee Gees started in the 60s, and you listen to the 60s and it's definitely 60s music, but it's definitely the Gibb brothers singing. So
right. Well, one night we'll do a oldies episode, and we'll go through some classic oldies. But I think that I don't really want to end here because I love classic rock so much.
I know we could talk all night. Yeah.
But I think that maybe we could sit down when you get a chance.
Yeah.
And try to put down your 20 top classic rock songs of all time.
Classic rock songs. Okay. Well, one of them is my top rock song of all time. So there we go.
Because I don't know if we could do. Yeah, I mean, you could do band, but whatever.
Well, I think it's a better idea to do a list because that kind of confines it to that.
Yeah.
And you can still, comment and talk about the songs on the list, but at least it keeps it to a number. And because, I mean, classic rock, especially just 70s, even if you just kept it from 70 to 79, you could talk for hours on that stuff. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, some of the best music ever came out of that time frame. Yeah, like I said, without Led Zeppelin, there probably wouldn't be any heavy metal, any rock band, stuff.
Right.
Later on. But yeah, I would definitely say, my top rock song of all time comes out of the 70s.
We need to have a one-hit wonder episode. We're talking about one-hit wonders, and maybe even, I like a genre that I've really gotten into lately. Well, for several years now, but at least for the last month, I've been listening to it a lot lately. Is the new wave music of the 80s.
Oh, I love it.
And I've been listening. Like today, I had my my earbuds going. I was listening to Echo and the Bunnymen.
I was just about to say that. That's crazy. I was gonna say you gotta put that going. You gotta have some Lips Like Sugar and Killing Moon. And
well, I didn't realize how many good songs they had.
Bring on the Dancing Horses and golly, just so many songs.
They came to Atlanta like 5 years ago.
The Cutter, Spare Us the Cutter. That's all. Yeah, I almost went and saw them. Actually, it was one of those bands where I was like, man, I should go see them, and I didn't. Kind of like I almost did that with Howard Jones too. Because he played the listening room of the City Winery
But them and the Church is the other band I've been listening to.
Oh, the Church, too, yeah, so. Under the Milky Way.
But that's another episode though, Jason.
Yeah, there we go.
That'll round out our classic rock for today.
Yeah, we don't want to give them too much of a preview.
No. Maybe I should make this in a special one. Exclusive.
Yeah,
anyway, all right, man. We'll see you later, and thanks everybody for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you.